Hello and welcome to the Indie Alternative Podcast. It's me, Chris. A very happy New Year to you all. I hope you all had some great celebrations last night. I'm recording this on New Year's Day without a hangover. It was very un-rock and roll in the Oldham household last night. But anyway, today I'm very pleased to bring you another top 5 episode or bonus episode for the podcast. I had the pleasure of speaking to James Mcmahon about 3 weeks ago now. James was very generous with his time considering he was suffering from COVID, and he gives me his top 5 indie tunes from the 90s. It was a really fun episode to do. Before we get to that though, just a quick reminder of the ways you can support the podcast. So just make sure you follow on social media. Search for Indie Alternative Podcast on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can also support the podcast financially. Just hit the coffee donation page in the show notes. There is a link to that. You can support me with a one-off payment or you can subscribe monthly. It's up to you. And lastly, if you've not rated the podcast or left a review, it would be great if you could do that, as it really helps. Anyway, that's it for the waffle, and here's James. Welcome to the podcast, James Mcmahon. How are you?
I'm awful, actually. Yeah, no, I'm all over the place. I've just I'm like 2 weeks. I'm a couple of days after 2 weeks of COVID. I don't know how long they say COVID hangs around, but I feel like one of those. You know those fish, those blobfish. You seen those blobfish? Like it's just got no bones holding myself together, and I feel wretched, but I feel very privileged to be here talking to music with you.
Oh, thank you, mate. And it's great to have you on. You're a sort of a podcast journalist extraordinaire. When did it all start? When did it all start with music for you? Because you've been a journalist and a music journalist, but where would the sort of that love for music start?
I've just always I really do remember being little. Music's not like a big thing in my family or anything. I mean, my mum can talk about seeing the Small Faces or whatever in the 60s, and she loves music, but she's not, it's not like the thing that, it's not the thing that soundtracks her life or anything. And my dad is, my dad doesn't like anything, let alone music. So it wasn't really, I don't really know, it didn't come from that way, which I know it does for a lot of people, but I do distinctly remember being a kid in the 80s, listening to Stock Aitken and Waterman hits on the radio and being like, this is amazing. Like, just having melodies buzzing around my head. And that was really, really, really young. I was kind of like, I think it's a story that a lot of people my age might relate to, like pre-internet, living, in places a bit off the grid. I'm from like a little pit village in South Yorkshire, like before the internet. The local library was this treasure trove of sounds and a proper gateway into another world. And I just loved books and stuff, but he says, like a proper heathen. But when I realised I could start renting records as well, like I was just away. And then Nirvana happened. Nirvana absolutely blew my head off, just changed everything for me. And then I guess that I always wanted to contribute as well as like consume. That's a bit of a defining feature of my life, really. Whereas I think some people, they listen to music, they're like, this is brilliant, they can't get enough of it. But I was always like, I want to play music and I want to write about music and I want to promote music. And just, that was the start of it all, really, the sort of the touch paper being lit.
In terms of writing then and reviewing and just interviewing artists and stuff as well, then was there some sort of, do you remember some sort of, or your first time of sort of dabbling in that world and kickstarting you to sort of pursue that as a career?
So there's this band called Biss from Scotland, and they, when people talk about a band that sort of changed their life, I always say Nirvana, but then it happened again, and I think I was 16, and I was watching Top of the Pops, and this band bounced on stage unlike anything I've ever heard before, and I just got obsessed with them. like, you know, it's such a cliche, really, that thing about, you know, a band on Top of the Pops changing your life. When people talk about, you know, Bowie or, I don't know, T-Rex or something, you know, like from the 70s. And it really was like that for me. Like, you know, I went to school and my mates at school would be like, "Oh, did you watch that band last night? They were awful." But you know, that made me like them even more because they were just so different. And the thing with that band was, you know, they really were like an underground indie pop band. Like the single that came out after Candy Pop, which is what they played on Top of the Pops, they had like one of their home addresses printed on the 7-inch because they thought the reach would be so small. And getting into that band, it was like, it's almost like sort of joining a cult or something. And then, like, two of them did fanzines, and then so I discovered what fanzines were. And again, you know, pre-internet or at the very dawn of the internet, that was hugely appealing because sort of just showed me that there was a life beyond, you know, the grey, dreary boundaries of, you know, where I grew up in. And then, you know, like, once I started writing about music for my fanzine, I probably intersected with a total obsession with the NME around that time. Stephen Wells, Johnny Cigarettes, those writers were just, you know, were everything to me. Almost like teaching me a new vocabulary, really. And then, yeah, no, you know, kind of, I would be lying if I said that at that point I was like, I want to be a music journalist, because I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that was possible for someone like me. But that was definitely the point where writing about music just became something I did. And then that obviously led me to, you know, where I ended up.
James, we're here to talk about indie bangers as well. And I gave you the task of picking your top 5, which is quite a difficult thing for anyone to do if you've grown up in the 90s or the early 2000s. But we stuck to the decade of the 90s. How did you find picking your top 5?
Yeah, really easy, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think I said actually on the message to you, like, kind of ended with "That's My Childhood," and with the exception of maybe one song on there, that really is like the narrative of how I got into music. But I've always been quite, you know, if someone said, I mean, even all 5 of those songs would make, you know, now that's what I call James Mcmahon's taste in music, and they'd certainly be in like a top 100, you know. But I you know, if someone said to me, "What's your favourite song ever?" I think I could probably get there, you know. I think I could probably, or they said, "What's your, you know, 10 favourite songs ever?" I think I could, you know, it'd be tricky, like it would be for anyone that loves music, because you'd be like, "Oh, I should have this in there or this in there." But there are just songs that I just think are my favourite songs, so it wasn't that hard.
Good. Let's start from the top. I don't know what order you want to go down, but we'll start from the list that you gave me. We'll start with Biss then, considering we've already mentioned Biss today. Starbright Boy, 1996.
Yeah, that one. I guess that one was a bit tricky because I could have picked a lot of Biss songs, but and you know, like with that band, I have been such a devotee of them that I suppose a favourite Biss song changes quite a lot. But that's just a definitive for me, really. It just sort of articulates a lot of what I like about them. They, you know, it's not an early single, but it was quite early after they signed to Ouija, which I thought was an amazing label from my formative years, kind of getting into music. You know, I love loads of records that came out on that label, whether it was Brassy or Corner Shop. And Starbright Boys, like, it's still very them, you know, it's still very indie pop. You know, Mandarin's got a rap in the middle. You know, it's all about 80s movies and I love all that stuff. But it's also sort of them like trying to be Blur, and you know, as I'll come to, like Blur were like maybe sort of my first sort of teen crush as bands go. You know, I had posters on the wall. I spent hours and hours and hours pretending to be Graham Coxon. So yeah, no, just a bit of a marriage of all that stuff, really.
And it's got a great video. I mean, I don't think I've ever sat and watched the video from start to finish before, because I was also listening to this in prep for the podcast. But probably one of the best videos from that era, I reckon, just in terms of just the way they've committed to that setup.
You know what? They're like, one of the things that's quite cool about kind of doing what I do is that, like, in a few cases, I've ended up becoming quite friendly with people whose music I loved when I was younger, and one being Biss, you know, like they're friends now, which blows my mind, really. I went to see them. They did, like, you know, they're sort of, they generally just exist now. You know, they do a couple of gigs every year and, you know, make a new record now and again and stuff. But there was a period where they were kind of off and on again. And during one of the periods when they came back, I went to see them and play at Primavera in Barcelona. And I was, like, hanging out. I didn't know them that well at that point, but I was hanging out with John Disco, one of the guitarists, after the gig. And I mean, it was just, I wasn't interviewing him or anything, but I was just asking him everything that I had ever wanted to ask a member of Biss. And there must have been part of him going, how come I'm standing in, I mean, Primavera basically sort of takes place in like a car park. How am I standing in a car park in 2010 talking about things that happened 15 years ago before with this really intense, over-enthusiastic young man? Like, I mean, he was great, but I was asking him things like that about, like, the Starlight Boy video and who was in it, and, you know, where the set was built, and if you're into indie pop, like, there's loads of really quite famous faces in that video. There's Amelia Fletcher's in there, and Sean that used to work at Rough Trade, and he plays the dastardly boss and stuff. So it's a bit of a sort of who's who of underground music of that time, you know. But no, it's cool, man.
We'll move on to the second choice then, James, which is, I've got to say, I've never heard this song, or I don't think I've even heard anything from the artist. Elliot Green, Red Rum.
I think if I was going to say what my favourite song was ever, you know, like, as much as I'm a complete, you know, indie nerd, I think my favourite song would end up being like, you know, it would end up being like a soul song or something. You know, it would end up being, you know, like one of those, I don't know, like a This Old Heart of Mine or Stand By Me or something like that. But if within, like, you know, the realm of noisy guitars and, you know, what I suppose we call indie music, like, I genuinely believe this song might be the most perfect song I've ever heard. And it's such a weird story for them, actually. They, I was a kid, I was listening to the evening session, I heard this song, it's called Red Rum, band Elliot Green, and I remember just about catching Lamac saying the name of, saying the record that it came from, which is called United States. It was just, I mean, it just blew my head off. I just thought it was the most amazing song, and I went out and bought the record. And the weird thing is when I bought the record, I don't think I listened to any other song on the record other than that song for maybe 10 years. Like, it was almost like this song is so perfect that I can't dilute it by listening to any other songs by them, because what if they're terrible? And they're not. It's a good record, although I don't think any of the songs on the record are as good as that song. And then I guess when I was older, I mean, they didn't really do anything. They're from Yeovil, and every so often I'm sort of embarrassed to admit this, really. You know, some people, I guess, look up what their first loves are doing on Facebook, but every so often I just scoot around the internet and see if I can find any information on Elliot Green. And there are a few, like, sort of webzine articles on them that are really old, you know, like when the internet was really shonky, and, you know, a lot of kind of broken links and stuff. But there is a bit that's been written about them, and I think they're one of those bands that anyone who saw them at the time loved them and thought they were really, you know, they were really quite special. But yeah, no, if you know, if in the strange event that anyone from Elliot Green is listening to this, like, get in touch, because I'd absolutely love to. I'd absolutely love to know more. I would love to ask them questions ad infinitum about that song. I just think it's genius.
There isn't a great deal of information online about them, is there either? Like, us try to sort of hunt down a Wikipedia page or anything, but it's scarce, which is rare.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think that's I don't think that's totally the appeal. You know, for me, I was just about to say, I guess I was almost going to autopilot then and going, oh, maybe that's part of the appeal. But I don't think it is the appeal, really. Like, you know, I'm super indie, but I love it when the bands I like, you know, become big. And lots of people know them. I'm not sort of elitist like that. But I don't know, it's just a bit of a, you know, I do this website and the occasional episode that sits within my main music podcast, James Mcmahon music podcast, called Indie Heaven, where and the sort of premise is like speaking to bands that don't exist anymore, but you know, maybe I mean some of them, you know, I've done Ned's Atomic Dustbin for there, or Echo Belly, or Carter USM, you know, which were all bands that achieved a fair bit, but the ones I really enjoy speaking to the most are the bands that sort of they were sort of there and then they weren't there. But at the same time, their legacy is sort of that weirdos like me ended up obsessing about one of the songs for 20 years or whatever. And in a weird way, that the idea for that website stroke podcast was born out of this song, because I don't know, it just seems weird to me that you can listen to a person's voice over and over and over and over again in your life, and their song can matter so much to you, but you just could pass them in the street and not know who they were. And I guess that kind of, as the world becomes so fast and you are assaulted with so much information, there's sort of something quite, I don't know, there's a bit of sort of magic in that, really, I think. Magic in failure, that's my spin.
The next choice is a slightly more well-known Nirvana track. Well, not necessarily as well-known, but radio-friendly unit shifter. This is probably one of the most influential bands ever, I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not. Yeah, kind of. Like, Nirvana are a weird band in that I think a lot of the music that they inspired is awful. And I would maybe argue that, like, I don't know, you know, Nirvana, I think, were they around today, would talk about their big influences being the Pixies or Black Sabbath or the Beatles, and, you know, all those bands I think are a lot more influential. But I think with Nirvana, it still sort of blows my mind to this day that I lived at a time when Nirvana existed. Like, and they unquestionably completely changed my mindset about music from the very off, because they turned me onto underground music. And I just don't think that would have happened if I'd got into Guns N' Roses first. No, I mean, not that I particularly have a problem with Guns N' Roses, you know, like, put Appetite for Destruction on at a certain time of the day and I'll lose my mind. But, like, Nirvana were sort of taught me a different, I don't know, sort of set of rules. That doesn't sound very sexy, but like they taught me that you could do it in a different way, and it kind of blows my mind that happened, and also that happened at such a sort of early point in my life. But, you know, like when I hear Radio Friendly Unit Shifter, which is my favourite Nirvana song on my favourite Nirvana record, which is in Utero, like, I'm 13, you know, I'm down the youth club.
Yeah.
You know, it's magic. And I just think the thing with Radio Friendly Unit Shifter is that, for me, it just embodies everything I love about Nirvana. You know, it's super tuneful. You know, like the chorus is an amazing hook, but it's just nasty as well. You know, like, it's filthy. The guitars sound filthy. Yeah. There's an amazing. I mean, probably even better than the tune itself. There's an amazing live performance. I think it's for some MTV show, which is on YouTube, and there are 4-piece at that point because Pat Smear's playing guitar, and I remember watching it for the first time and just being like, they should play this in schools. They should just play this for kids. You know, It would just be, it's just like as a cultural document, it's just, it's amazing.
I think it's exactly the same thing happened to me. I think I was listening to a lot of thrash metal and just very traditional heavy metal. And then I think with Nirvana, just listening to an older brother's, not my older brother, but around a friend's house doing, power chords and stuff, or practicing for a band I used to play in called Bad Obsession in a church. And around another, older brother playing Nirvana from his bedroom. I'm thinking, what the hell is that? It just sounded so alien. But then, opened up everything, then it was Alice in Chains and everything else for me after that. And such a turning point in terms of just being able to progress or think, like you say, just the guitar's not being perfect. And, back when I was listening to guitar music at the very early days, like Slayer and Megadeth, Metallica, it was so much precision in that music and finesse, and speed. And here was something that was just completely ramshackled and raw. It was amazing.
Well, I mean, not that I want to skip past the revelation that you were in a band called Bad Obsession, which is quite the name. Part of me wants to say, I really want to hear you, but I think more than anything, I really want to design a logo for you on the front of my Jota. I feel like it would be like clashing swords and.
Yeah, we had a song called Night Stalker.
Oh, of course you did.
Yeah, I mean, everything kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Playing in the church as well.
That's the best bit of the story, actually. No, I think with I don't know. I'm a bit loath to sort of describe Nirvana as like ramshackle, so to speak, because I do think that just the way, especially when Grohl gets involved, I think the way they lock in is amazing. But I guess it is that thing of like, I remember, idiots at school being. When everyone was into music, I remember idiots at school being like, "Oh, you can't even play the guitar," and you'd be like, "Well, you blatantly can," but it's just that, them being kind of schooled on, I don't know, not to pick on Slash or anything, but like he played guitar in a very different way, but I think that was a bit of the appeal for me as well. Like, I heard Nirvana and I formed a band, within, I mean, we weren't very good. We were called the Hairdos at that point. But I formed a band within, kind of 6 months, mucking about in my mate's garage. And I don't think I would have if I'd heard, I don't know, Dream Theater or something, because I just would have been like, that looks really hard, Whereas with Nirvana, I was like, I can probably do that. But I think the other thing that's genius with Nirvana is that, like, nobody, like, even though what they do isn't particularly difficult to do, nobody sounds like them. It's so. I don't think I've ever. I've been in so many like rehearsal rooms over the years with bands, and you kind of hear someone in another room doing, I don't know, Territorial Pissings or something like that, and like it doesn't sound like Nirvana. It just sounds like a bunch of idiots. But like, because it's almost just something that's alchemy between the people that are in the band and. The way it all sort of clicks together and stuff. I love Nirvana. I love Nirvana in such a way that I can still get excited about them now after all these years. Like if I see a photo of Nirvana, I'm like, God, they look brilliant.
Then we go to choice number 4, Pulp and Pink Glove from His and Hers, 94, I think. It's a bit of a contrast this to what we've been talking about, and really in terms of like. Just where we are in the decade, and just I don't know, everything from the whole package, the whole Pulp package. I mean, what a time as well. I mean, it just seems so different. There you go.
Yeah, no, I think Pulp are like they're a weird band in the sense that they feel quite at odds with like the modern age, which I guess that isn't that weird really, because the whole thing with Pulp is that it existed for such a long time before that point, before His and Hers, and almost like, they sort of changed a little bit, but really the world sort of synced up with them. I think there's a lot of, Britpop. I'm a real like Britpop apologist, like a lot of other music journalists can I've read some truly appalling takes over the years about how Brexit was born from Britpop and all this sort of bollocks. But for me, like being 14, 15, 16, it was just amazing to me. And I think that Britpop produced some really weird music, because some really great weird music, because it was almost like a place for weirdos and eccentrics. And, you know, I remember going to see Pulp and like Tiger supporting, or like Denim supporting, and they're like, I mean, you know, Denim, you know, Lawrence, you know, being felt like these people were unique. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm sort of going off on a bit of a tangent there. But I think the thing with Pink Glove is that I've heard them criticise. I've heard Bernard, I think one of the reasons why Bernard Butler left Suede was because allegedly he didn't like Ed Buller's production on Dogman Star, but I'm sure I've heard Pulp moan about the production of His and Hers as well, and that's Ed Buller. But I love it. Like I love that era of Pulp where Russell Senior is like just who I think is almost like the sort of the secret sauce when it comes to Pulp, if I'm being honest.
Yeah,
and he's sort of conjuring that like almost a sort of ethereal noise, and then I just love the way Jarvis sings at that point. And that song was like, you know, when I was listening to that song, I didn't know what it was about. You know, I didn't know it was like mucky. But that sort of almost added to the sort of the illicit nature of it as well. You know, like, oh, what's all this about? Oh, I feel quite grown up listening to this. You know, but I could have picked a bunch of songs of His and Hers, and you know, maybe even, well, you know, certainly different class. And you know, I love a load of songs on This Is Hardcore, and you know, even beyond. You know, like Pulp are really kind of a band that I just love. But yeah, Pink Glove's always the one that, if I'm sort of making a playlist or something like that, it's always the one I come back to. I grew up in Doncaster, you know, it's my hometown, and you know, that's like 30 minutes, 20 minutes from Sheffield, and you know, that's where we would go. You know, that's where we would go to gigs when we were old enough to go there, or it was just kind of where we'd go and hang around Sheffield. And it was, I don't know, like almost, I was at quite a young age, like mucking around, going to charity shops and, you know, wearing clothes that, you know, old men would wear, and like sort of leaning into kitschness and, you know, almost like sort of trying to live your life like you were in His and Hers, you know, like it was weird going to Sheffield at that point, and the places we would hang around, like Tin Pan Alley, and it was just nothing like I knew in Doncaster, you know. It was just going into kind of retro clothes shops, and that wasn't anywhere, that was nothing like what was in Doncaster at that point. And like, I don't know, that record makes a lot more sense, or it made a lot of sense to me, sort of almost seeing where they'd come from. I feel like quite lucky in that way, really.
Do you think they'll ever reform?
Well, I always hear that they don't really get on. That's, I mean, not that that's ever been reported, but that's kind of just what I've always been the scuttlebutt, which is a shame if that's the case. But also, I can understand. Maybe I can understand why that would happen. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird, really. Like they got back together, didn't they, about 10 years ago, and did, I think it was Reading Festival, and I missed them, unfortunately, which is a long and far too convoluted story for the here and now. But I don't know, really. I suppose it depends on cash, doesn't it? I suppose it depends if, you know, they'd get a good wad of cash. But I think Jarvis has managed to be consistently interesting for you know, for all of that time, and he's sort of like, I mean, that guy literally, I've never interviewed him, but I've crossed paths with him a few times, and I think he would be like, oh, all he ever wanted to be was famous and known, and then he got about as famous and known as you could be, and then he hated it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think now he's probably where he would like to be, which is, you know, just being known for being good at what you do and being respected and stuff. So, I don't know. I mean, I would love to see Pulp again, but yeah, I don't know. I'm pleased to have been a teenager at the moment when it all blew up.
Final choice then, James. We're going to go with Blur. This is a low, probably one of my favourite all-time tracks, to be fair, and one on the list that I think resonates with me the most, Park Live from '95. And this is probably one of the better tracks on that album, I think.
You're implying that they're not all brilliant on that album.
There's a couple of difficult ones.
Oh, what you not into?
Not the one that comes after Tracy Jacks, isn't it? London Loves.
Oh, I love London Loves. Oh no, I really do. No, I really do. I actually was putting that I put that on a playlist recently.
I do apologise. I should never insult the guests.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I love that song though. I should have picked that. Yeah, I'm going to talk about London Loves. The thing I love about London Loves is that I love the bit where, I don't know, there's a lot on that record where they're almost fetishizing a version of Britain that doesn't really exist anymore. But actually, I think London Loves is quite a good snapshot of what I know and love and hate about London. Like, I love that bit where almost sort of sounds like they're trying to tune the radio in, and it's just very evocative, and I can see the bright lights, and I can see the puddles, you know, the bright lights refracting off the puddles.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that song. That's surprising. But anyway, now I think that the thing with This Is a Low is it was, I just could have picked one of many Blur songs. They were just like, you know, there's that sort of cliche. There was a lot of girls at my school who loved Take That or Boyzone, or not so much Boyzone, E17. That was more sort of the era, and I was like that about Blur, you know, like I was just nuts. Posters on my wall, you know. I remember going to see them at Sheffield Arena and counting down the days for, you know, like almost a year beforehand. You know, it was just proper fandom, you know, and I think they were just such a good band for that. You know, they were an indie band, but they were almost kind of a pop band as well. Like, they looked great. They said really funny things. They said a lot of stupid things, which I didn't think were stupid at the time. I thought they were funny. But I was just obsessed with Coxswain, you know. My mum always tells me a story about when she was at school, when she was a little girl, and she was obsessed with the Monkees, and how Peter Tork was her favourite, and she would be saving up money to get a Peter Tork poster or whatever, and I was just like that, a bit like that with Blur, you know. It was like I had my favourite, you know. Coxswain was just my hero, you know. So, and the song itself, you know, there's all those stories about how Damon is, I think he's staying at his dad's house, and he's like listening to the shipping forecast and trying to work that into a song, and you know, all that stuff. But again, it's Graham, really. It's just the way he plays guitar in that song, like the tone. I love the tone of his guitar and the way that he ekes that solo out of it, and I think also I think a lot of Blur obsessives would say that, and actually just people who'd followed Damon Albarn's music beyond that, even, that he's just so brilliant at melancholy.
Yeah,
He's just so brilliant at just articulating a certain kind of sadness. I've never interviewed him, and I was thinking the other day how much I would love to interview him, because, you know, I'm someone who is definitely kind of plugged into, you know, being sad, you know, like that's definitely something I have a lot of experience of in my life, and I'm very interested in sort of psychology and things like that. And I would love to try to understand where that melancholy comes from, because it's not, it's not that common. And I just think that's the thing with This Is Low, is I just think it does that. You can maybe argue that he does that better later on. You can, he thought of Cars or Yukon Hero, or, it's all over, like the self-titled record.
This one of the track this reminds me of, or maybe just follows suit, is No Distance Left to Run, which I think is an absolute heartbreaker. And one of the other ones off this, the Universal has got a similar kind of swellingness to it. It just sort of just evokes kind of sadness.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, unfortunately, Universal's been ruined by British Gas for me. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't quite hear like maybe what was intended to be heard at the time, but no, he's just brilliant at it. There was a song I was listening the other day to, that solo record he put out, and I'll be honest, I haven't spent a load of time with it, but I was listening to it quite early in the morning the other week when I was trying to do some work, and I had to turn it off about halfway through because I just was finding it just so. It was like, I don't know, like my mum. My mum's always, I'm giving my mum quite a lot of props here, aren't I? My mum always says to me, like, my mum's watching The Handmaid's Tale at the moment. She's always like, oh, you should, and I've watched quite a bit of it, and she's like, you should catch up. I'm like, I can't listen to The Handmaid's Tale in 2021 because it's like watching a documentary.
Yeah.
Like, it's just too sad for, like, the state of the world. And I felt a little bit like that with David the other day. I was just like, nope, this is too much for me right now. But no, I mean, the guy's just a genius, I don't really like throwing the word genius around when it comes to music, because I almost feel like it should be safe for scientists and what's not. But
yeah,
the guy's just amazing with melody. He's almost like McCartney level. Yeah, amazing.
And he's rocking a mullet at the moment, which I think is awesome.
I mean, he is literally living his best life.
He can do what he wants, hairstyle wise. I mean,
I think so. And also, like, he was like the most handsome man in the country for about 10 years as well. Like,
yeah,
just let it all hang out now. Although I was the other day, I was looking at I saw a recent picture of Graham Coxon, and I was like, yeah, you are aging like a fine wine.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird with that band, how you've got the guy in the band that like bloody loves cheese and like likes, faffing around on farms and stuff. And then I don't know, I know people who know Dave Rowntree a little bit. I'm hoping I can interview him at some point. And then you've got these two people who just went, yeah, no, I'm not really into fame. It's kind of weird, this sort of juxtaposition between them all as personalities. Yeah, no, I love that band.
Well, I'm going to let you go into the night, James. Get yourself into bed with a hot toddy or whatever you do.
Absolutely. No, I noticed. I felt like, much is the case of COVID. Like, I felt like all right actually having that conversation, and then probably when we got to Blur, I was like, I think you can hear that splutter, So yeah, it's definitely time to wrap things up.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for picking the songs and talking to me on the podcast. It's been brilliant.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure, mate.